You know what confuses most people? The difference between being alone and being lonely. We've built an entire culture around the idea that connection equals happiness. That the more friends you have, the more parties you attend, the more fulfilled you must be. But there's this entire group of people who would genuinely rather stay home on a Friday night than go out, who feel a wave of relief, not disappointment, when plans get canceled, who can spend an entire weekend alone and feel more recharged than drained. They're your coworker who always has a convenient excuse for happy hour, your friend who takes 3 business days to respond to a simple text, the person at the party who's mentally calculating their exit strategy 15 minutes after arriving. And here's what nobody tells you. They're not sad. They're not damaged. They're not running from something. Their brain is just wired to recharge differently. And in a world that treats solitude like a problem to be solved, that makes them one of the most misunderstood personality types out there. People who prefer solitude weren't always this way. Or maybe they were, but the world taught them to hide it. Picture this. You're 8 years old, and it's recess. Everyone's running around, screaming, playing games with rules that seem to change every 5 minutes. The noise is overwhelming. The social navigation is exhausting. And you'd rather sit under a tree with a book, or draw, or just think. But then a teacher comes over with that concerned look and says, "Why don't you go play with the other kids? Don't you want friends?" And right then, you learn something. Choosing to be alone means something's wrong with you. So you try. You join the groups. You go to the parties. You say yes to every invitation because that's what you're supposed to do. But every single time, there's this battery that drains, this exhaustion that nobody else seems to feel. And when you finally get home, close the door, and sink into silence, it's not loneliness you feel. It's relief. Pure, honest relief. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology found that people with higher intelligence report lower life satisfaction the more frequently they socialize with friends. Not because they don't like people, but because their brains process social interaction as high-cost activity. Researchers estimate that 25 to 30% of the population leans introverted with a strong preference for solitude. That's tens of millions of people whose nervous system is fundamentally different. That's an entire segment of humanity learning from childhood. Your natural state makes other people uncomfortable, and that creates a lifetime of explaining, defending, and justifying why you'd rather be alone. That preference for solitude did more than make them selective about socializing. It completely changed how their brain processes stimulation. When people who prefer being alone walk into a crowded room, their sensory system doesn't filter input the same way extroverts do. Every conversation nearby, every laugh, every movement, it all registers at the same volume. It's not that they can't handle it. It's that processing it requires exponentially more cognitive energy. Psychologically, this creates what neuroscientists call a low dopamine reward response to social stimulation. While extroverts get a neurochemical reward from social interaction, solitude preferers get that same reward from internal reflection, creative work, or simply existing in low-stimulation environments. Your brain learned early. Solitude isn't isolation. It's restoration, which is why people who prefer being alone protect their alone time with the intensity of someone guarding their life force, because, in a way, they are. And here's what's fascinating. Research from the Journal of Personality shows that people who score high on preference for solitude also score higher on creative thinking, emotional regulation, and what psychologists call self-sufficiency. They're not avoiding connection. They're selectively investing in it. Because when every social interaction costs more energy, you become incredibly intentional about where you spend it. But here's the cost nobody sees. The constant justification. Why don't you ever come out? Are you okay? You're always alone, as if choosing solitude is evidence of pathology rather than preference. So, yeah, Psychologists might call it social withdrawal or avoidant behavior. But people who prefer being alone, they just call it self-preservation. It's not that they hate people exactly. It's more like they've learned their operating system runs on low power mode, and social interaction is a battery-draining app they only open when it's actually worth it. They like people, deeply even, but in small doses, in meaningful contexts. One-on-one over dinner, not 20 people at a loud bar. They'll skip the group chat but show up when it matters. They'll go weeks without texting, but remember every detail of the last conversation you had. And that's a big reason people misunderstand them. It's not about being antisocial. It's about being selectively social. Because in a world that measures connection by quantity, they're measuring it by quality. And honestly, they'd rather have 3 deep friendships than 30 shallow ones. But here's what nobody expects. Despite all this, people who prefer being alone often form the most loyal, most emotionally intimate relationships. They don't do small talk. They don't do surface-level friendships. They go deep, or they go home. This depth over breadth approach was forged through years of realizing that if they're going to spend their limited social energy, it better be on something that actually matters. There's this weird paradox at the core of solitude preferers. They're simultaneously the most independent people you'll ever meet and the most intensely devoted friends. They'll never need constant contact. You could not talk for 3 months, and when you reconnect, it's like no time passed. But if you call at 3 a.m. because you need help, they'll be there. No drama, no social media post about it. Just quiet, competent presence. In romantic relationships, this becomes its own challenge. Partners often interpret their need for space as emotional distance. Why do you need alone time if you love me? But for them, wanting space while in a relationship isn't contradiction. It's maintenance. They're not pulling away. They're recharging so they can show up fully. The partners who get this, those relationships last. The ones who don't, constant conflict over something that feels like basic survival to the solitude preferer. At work, they're the ones who despise open offices with a passion that borders on physical pain. Not because they're antisocial, because they're trying to think, and every conversation within a 15-foot radius feels like someone screaming directly into their brain. They'll collaborate beautifully when there's a purpose. Random synergy meetings with no agenda, that's their personal hell. Remote work wasn't a pandemic adaptation for them. It was liberation. And their relationship with social media? Complicated at best. They watch people perform their lives online and feel exhausted just witnessing it. It's not judgment. It's genuine confusion about where people get the energy to share that much, that publicly, that constantly. For them, privacy isn't about having something to hide. It's about having a self that exists independently of external validation. They learned early. The less people know about your internal world, the more protected that world stays. And now they're living in a culture that never stops demanding interaction. Constant notifications, always-on availability, social media that punishes invisibility. Networking events where your value is measured by how many hands you shake, not the quality of conversation you have. They give themselves permission to opt out, to not respond immediately, to decline invitations without elaborate excuses. But society keeps asking, are you okay? Are you depressed? Do you need help? As if choosing solitude in 2025 is a symptom rather than a valid way to exist. People who prefer being alone are the lighthouses in a world obsessed with networking events. And lighthouses don't leave their posts to attend every gathering on the shore. They're just there, steady, self-contained, providing light exactly where they stand, expecting nothing in return. And maybe that's the most solitude-preferring thing of all, not needing the crowd to validate that your existence matters. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives into the psychology of being human, consider joining as a member. I would genuinely appreciate your support.